Okay, hello and welcome everybody. This is Ben Munson with FarmQA, and I'll be walking you through our third webinar series of the year here. And I'm going to kick this off by showing a PowerPoint slide, but we will focus most of our time on a live demo. So what I have here is just an intro to what we'll be talking about today. So it's FarmQA advice is the topic, and really what that means to us is it's our recommendation tool. So the topic is translate recommendations into grower value. Like I said, my name is Ben Munson. I'm a senior technology specialist here at FarmQA, and I deal a lot with the customer support and the sales of our product. So just a very quick recap of FarmQA. We build digital tools for the agronomist. So we covered the crop scouting tools. We built recommendation writing functionality on top of that. And then where we're going in the future, we have integrations to map layers, bringing in spatial data, analytics, and then we're going further on into integrations here in future years, and that's going to be the focus. But at the core, still going to be the customer being that agronomy tool set, whether that's an independent, an ag retail, someone working for a large farm. It's functionality that accommodates their needs. So like I said, advice, so what that means is that's easily writing chemical recommendations. So that's mixes, chemicals, whether that's insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, fertility products, etc., including rates, including product labels, pre-harvest interval, rainfast, REI, etc. Then rolling that up into a report, whether that's in-app or in the web view of FarmQA, or to a PDF that would go out to an end user, to a grower, etc. So that's what we're covering today and what that workflow looks like within our product. And I will be taking questions at the end, so please do be putting that in the chat box of Microsoft Teams as we continue through this webinar. With that said, let's jump into the product and we can address how this functionality works in FarmQA. So what you're seeing now is FarmQA Controller. This is our web view. We have a mobile component to the product, which you can go back and see in previous webinars how that functions. We will start out by addressing the setup side of our recommendation functionality. But just a high-level overview here before we get in is you would first delineate your fields within FarmQA. You can do that via an import. You can draw your boundaries. But then when we actually write these chemical recommendations, they will be associated back to fields within a specific growing season. What that provides us is that if you want to get a year-end report, let's say a spray record of what you did on a particular field, you can select a field and easily get to that log or record of what you sprayed on a given field. So with that said, that's kind of the basics, but getting into the actual setup side, you'll notice on the left-hand side of our web interface, we have an advice tab. After clicking on that, you're going to see three tabs on the top. Recommendations is where you see all of the completed or written recommendations within FarmQA. Then we're going to get into the details of all these columns and viewing reports. But I want to draw your attention to the products and mixes tab, as this is really the building blocks of the feature. Under products, this is where you're going to see the chemicals that I referenced. So if you look at the types of chemicals we support, you see a drop down here which covers the insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, etc., which I referenced. As you look through here, you can see that this would be a personalized list for your operation. So it cuts out the kind of the noise around other products, and you know that a product in here could be something that you could recommend. Now, the question of how does this data get populated? How do the products come into FarmQA? There's really two ways we can do this. One is that we can take the data via an import. So if you have a database of chemicals that you currently use, we could import that and bring in a lot of the content that you're seeing within a given product here. The more common use case is if you want to build up your own product database in FarmQA, you can do that through a direct import from the EPA. So we have an integration via an API to the EPA where you can, if I click on this, search based on product name, based on EPA number, and that's going to find a product with all the details. So for example, if I type in wide match, you can see, if I spell correctly, you can see wide match shows up as a herbicide. And with that, if I click on the plus button to the left of it, it's going to say you have one product to import. Now I can continue on and do a second search, and it's going to find additional products, something like Endura as a fungicide. Now I have 2 products to import. If I add these products, you're going to note that they will get added into the database specific to your FarmQA account. And so you can see here's the wide match product where it populates that it's a herbicide. You can see the name. We do have a registered name. So in this case, if you wanted to give this essentially a nickname, it's called wide match, and then you see the full registered name would still be an input into the system. You can track the manufacturer. Things like target pests. This is something that you can enter, and the value of this is later on when we're searching for chemicals in a long list. You could search this based on the target pest or disease. So we could put something in like broadleaves. Now you'll see in a moment how that'll function in our search. In addition, you see that the EPA number does populate. The labels will come in through the EPA lookup. Note that this is an EPA label. We can also drag and drop or bring in other PDF labels if you have other labels that you want to be part of the FarmQA database. As we continue through here, note that we can put default rates. So if you have a rate that's maybe 12 ounces, you can select that, and you see our unit drop down as well. So in my case, I'm going to say this is a fluid ounces per acre unit. Now the EPA lookup does not provide us with the pre-harvest interval, rainfast, and REI, but you as a user can enter that in if you'd like. Additionally, you can select what crops you can spray this chemical on. So you could multi-select, and then the application method is listed down here as well. So if you typically broadcast the wide match, and then the application period, again, this is optional, but if we say this is a post-emerge, and then any specific notes can be captured down here as well to accompany this particular product. What does get auto-populated is you can see the ingredients on the right-hand side. So this is the percentage of each active ingredient. And then I did mention if you have other labels, or even let's say you've got state-specific or supplemental labels, you can drag and drop those to add it in this case, to the wide match product. Or you can be searching your computer to find any particular label you might want to attach. In my case, I'm going to save this product, and we're going to continue on to mixes. So after your product database is created, one of the more common use cases for how you actually write the rec is through creating these common mixes that you can nickname and then use when you write the chemical recommendation itself. So for example, I've got a corn post-emerge spray in here where I've got a couple chemicals listed with all the rates, labels, etc. But what I want to show is the process of actually creating a new mix. So what I'll do is I'll create a new mix where I can give it a name. So I'll call this the wheat mix. Maybe I'll just call it 3.0. I can include a water volume rate, instructions. Now these instructions would differ from the product instructions, and in this case it would pertain to the entire mix. So you could say, let's see, something like follow all PPE instructions. My target can be, let's say, broadleaves, and again, that's used for filtering later on. In my case, I'm just going to do a wheat example. So I've got hard red spring wheat as my crop. This is the point where I can add the products. So like I was saying before, if we had the products created ahead of time, this is where I can add in and search based on the name of the products, the EPA numbers. I could search on any of the crops that can be sprayed on. So if I typed in hard red spring wheat, now you see all the chemicals I can spray on that crop. The same thing actually goes for active ingredients. So if I if I type in an active ingredient, you can see these are all the chemicals that contain that active ingredient. Continue on to add this product, so I'm going to put in a few more products to complete this mix. And then I am also going to, let's see, I'll include the wide match, and then tilt is the last product I want to include in this mix. Once I click add, you see that those will populate in the order that I click them in within the add products button. However, I do have the option to drag and drop to adjust the mix order. So this, we apply the mix order based on the order that the products are shown within our mixes. We can also adjust the rate. So if I want to come up or down with the units, so let's say this is 12 ounces, but I actually want to put this down at maybe one pint per acre. You can see I can change that. One thing I should point out as I'm talking through this is that we do have not only empirical units, but we have metric and then a Canadian hybrid unit system as well, which I can show here at the end for any Canadian listeners. Once this mix is created, I'm going to click save. And what we'll do now is we'll actually walk through the workflow of writing a recommendation, and we can use this mix that I just created to save us time if we want to use this combination of chemicals. To do this, I'll jump over to our mobile application. So I'm going to simulate as if this were running on a phone, but do keep in mind that our mobile app runs on, as you can see here, a computer. It can run on a tablet, it can run on a phone, and that allows you to write chemical recs directly from the field. So what I've done here, I'll just take one step back. So we do have a map view, which you can view all your fields, and you could zoom in, select the field to write that recommendation. In my case, I've gone over to the Fields tab, and I've searched hard red spring wheat, and this is going to allow me to write a recommendation specific to just my hard red spring wheat fields. So if I select field 117, you can see that this pulls up the field specific details. If I click on the field, I can add an observation, which is our scouting workflow. I did walk through that in last week's webinar, so if you want more details on that, please do watch that. What we'll be talking through here is the create a recommendation option. So as I said, this is going to take this field 117, and we're going to indicate that a spray should happen on this field. The first thing you'll note in this interface is that we do have a field selector. So field 117 is selected by default, given that I'm in that field. However, one nice feature within FarmQA is that we can multi-select. So we're very efficient in being able to write recommendations that are going to cross fields. So what I'm going to do in this case is I've actually selected 3 hard red spring wheat fields. You can search by the field name. You see the acreage over here. And once I click done, that will populate into my field list. We do have the option to edit field details. This is an opportunity to do partial field recommendations or to simply add notes that are going to pertain to one of these 3 fields. So in my case, I'm going to take this field 166 and I'm going to indicate, instead of spraying the entire 151 acres, we're going to spot spray this, and we're just going to do 25 acres and say spray headlands only. Again, we could add notes for any one of these fields, and in fact, I'll do this here to say spray entire field, just to showcase what that note section will do for you. Now that we've added details, and that is an optional step, but the second thing we do is we can add our products. We can do this through an individual product lookup, or we can do it through our predefined mixes. So in my case, I'm going to pull up my mixes, and I have got all the mixes that you previously saw in the controller view. So I'm going to search this for my wheat mixes, and actually I'll type in wheat here so you can see my wheat mixes listed out. Now, if I select any one of my mixes, you get a preview of what that mix includes. So in this case, you can see those products I created. We could jump over to wheat mix 1, etc., and be viewing these before we actually decide to include that in a recommendation. Once I find that mix, I'm going to click done, and you note that this will populate all those products, the mix orders, the rates that we predefined as part of that mix. However, I do have the option to come into any one of these products, and from here, from the mobile app, I can adjust the rates. I can add in any additional notes. You can see down here, I get to see the EPA number, what crops can be sprayed on. If you did populate those pre-harvest intervals, rainfast and REI, you can see how that does show up down here at the bottom as well. We do have the ability to view labels, so if you want to pull this up on your mobile application and refer back to a particular rate per weed or per crop, you can do that. Additionally, if we back out, I did mention how you can add products from an individual product lookup. So if I click on this add product option, this is where we're going to see that individual list that I referenced. And this is where you can search based on product name. And again, if you want to search something like chlorothianol, you see all the products that contain chlorothianol in our list. So different search options. And then from here, you could click on a product and add it into our mix. What we can do as we move down through the interface is we have the water volume. This was set up in our mix, but we can again adjust this if we want to go up to maybe a 15 gallons per acre rate. Now the pre-harvest interval, rainfast, REI, that data will get pulled out of it'll be the highest value across all these products that we have in our mix. We do have the ability to add instructions to this mix. This would populate anything that we've entered on the mix previously, but in our case, I might say something to the spray applicator, to the grower, to say we need to take care of this issue right now. So now we can also put a priority level. This is optional, but in my case, I'm going to say this is a high priority recommendation. I can put in a time window for when I think something should happen. I have the ability to save this as a draft, so saving as a draft would allow me to store this just locally on my phone until I'm ready to essentially publish the recommendation. But in my case, I know that I do want to write this and send this out, so I'm going to go ahead and submit this recommendation. So this could potentially accompany a scouting report, which I will showcase here, but I wanted to point out how we now view that data. So we've written that rec within the Fields tab, selecting on Field 117. But if I jump over, we also have an Advice tab. So this is where you'll see all of your both in progress recommendations, which is what I just referenced, where there's a recommendation that's stored locally on your phone until you want to publish that. And you can multi-select and submit these in bulk. Or we can view our past recommendations. So these have already been written, they've been submitted, and can be viewed by growers as well. Now note this past recommendations section, you can filter this based on just the recommendations that you as the user has written, or maybe all recommendations across your organization. Now you can also search this. So if you want to search this based on maybe field 188, you can see all the recommendations that you've written on that field. Then you could actually multi-select and export those as a combined view. However, for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab that single recommendation that I did as part of our example. And once I click on that, I do have some PDF customization options. And this just, again, it changes how the PDF looks when it gets generated. As a user, we will remember your preferences on how you like this to look. So once you find an output that you do like, you don't have to adjust these inputs. I'm going to open my PDF. From that screen, if you were on a phone, we do provide a share button. So that's going to allow you to share a recommendation directly to a grower from the application. So what that means is it would pull up a shared tray, allowing you to text, email, WhatsApp that recommendation onto a grower, onto a colleague, onto a group of growers perhaps, that would then get that report. Note that once you do submit, that report also goes back into Controller, and you can see it within our web view as well. So the PDF that comes up here would have your logo on it. You can have the header be different, whether that's just your organization name or grower name. But the report view I have here, keep in mind that I have selected 3 wheat fields, and I gave the same recommendation for all 3 fields. So as we look through here, this field 117, I have my water volumes or my spray rates. I have the total number of water I'm going to need to complete this application. I know the field size. Now, if we look down into the notes, this is where I said spray entire field, and the products are listed by row, and we have the rates included. And because I know the field size, we're providing you with automatic product totals per field. Now, as we look down here, still thinking of product totals, this field 116 was the example I used to do a partial fields recommendation, where I said to just spray the headland. So I took 25 acres out of the 151, and now these product totals are going to reflect that 25 acres instead of doing the full calculation. Now, as I look down through the entire recommendation, we get to the bottom section where I see the recommendation product totals. What this is essentially a shopping cart of the products that you need with the totals across all 3 of these wheat fields. So that will be included in every report and can be included and shown to the grower, the applicator, etc. Now, at the very bottom of this, you will see that priority level, the date windows when I had recommended to do something, the pre-harvest intervals, rainfast REI data is included, along with that spray rate, total water volume needed, and the acreage we're going to cover with these 3 sprays. That's one output that we get from recommendations. Another thing to point out is if I do want to, let's say, send all the recommendations from this week to one grower, but it might go across wheat fields, soybean fields, corn fields, or any sort of specialty crops. What you can do from this view is we can use our organization picker. So I could grab just one farm, and now I'm viewing just the recommendations for that farm. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to multi-select and say all 3 of these recs I want to put into a single PDF. So now what I'm going to showcase is I'm going to actually hide the per field details. And what this is going to do is it will show a condensed version, meaning that it will collapse the per field details and just show that shopping list down at the bottom for the totals across all 3 wheat fields. And then if I scroll down, here's my corn recs. And then I've got another set of corn recs with a different mix included. And then I still include that shopping cart, if you will, across both wheat fields, corn fields, soybean fields. So you can see here's all the chemical we need to have on hand to spray this a little over 1,000 acres. We can see that this spray crosses 3 different recommendations or different combinations of chemicals and includes 3 fields. So this is just an alternative view if you want more of a rolled up view beyond what I showed previously with that per field details. So you can see the difference here. Now within the mobile application, if the grower wants to get involved, if you're a custom applicator, you're a co-op, etc., that's doing the applicating, you can actually mark when these sprays occur. So far we've just said we recommend to spray this product in this time window. But if I click this complete option, well, let me take a step back. If I select the field, or the recommendation rather, and then click completed, we get a window that pops up, and now I can say that this field 117, I actually sprayed that today, and we're going to say I did that at 10:24. Now, when I mark this as completed, we're going to get back on controller, or within the PDF view, I will get a temperature, wind speed, and direction at time of application. So I'll actually go back into the older application here where you can see this field. In this case, it was a corn recommendation, but I completed this, or actually sprayed it on October 6th at 2:41, and you can see it was 75 degrees with 19-mile-an-hour winds. So that's the completion view. I would point out that we can also complete recommendations from a web view. So if you've got maybe a secretary or you are the applicator, but you want to sit down at the end of the day, we can now come in and use these action buttons at the top of the recommendation. And this is where we can, first of all, we can thumb through all of our recommendations for the day, for the week, for the month. But then the actions we can take is we could export this as either a PDF, from the web view, we actually do have an Excel option, which I'll show in a minute. We can create a mix from this recommendation. So let's say you wrote a recommendation, but it was unique to your mix list, where in other words, you haven't created that into a commonly used mix, but you foresee yourself using that frequently. You can click this option and it will use all the details from this mix or this recommendation and create it into a mix which can be reused. Now, what I was getting at earlier is we can mark this as completed from the web view. And in my case, again, I'm going to say this field 117. Let's just say we completed it right now. Marking that as completed, we get the date, and once that weather data comes through our integration, would populate there. So this is the web view. The other view that we can provide is, you note here that in my case, I have a scouting report linked to field 117. And I can click on that and it will bounce me over to the details of that scouting report, which you can see here. But if I want to send a PDF to a grower that contains this recommendation and the scouting report, I can do that, and you can see in my PDF customization options, it says link recommendation. I want that included either first, meaning before the scouting content, or last, meaning after the scouting content. So now if I generate this view, this will be more of a detailed view that has both the scouting data and the recommendation details in one single PDF. So you can see the output here with the current conditions at time of scouting. The recommendation is shown down here with those details that we saw in the previous report. So that's an alternative view if somebody wants more of a detailed view of the data. Now, if I jump back over to a recommendation, and I can also mark this, I can also edit this recommendation. So if you wrote a recommendation in the field, but you came back at night before you sent this out to a grower as a PDF, you could say, okay, well, I needed to actually increase this rate and I wanted to lop off one of the products, which you saw me do there. So now if I save this, this recommendation will be updated with those rates, etc. And now you could generate this as a PDF and send it out. Okay, I did talk about the export to Excel, so I want to touch on that briefly. You see all my recommendations are listed in this table view. I can break this down and view my recommendations for a given grower, for a given subdivision of a farm. I can break this down by time period. So you can see here the predefined windows, but we can also customize this. One of the unique things that we offer in this view is if you want to search, let's say for a particular field, maybe 231. Now, if I set my date window, I'm going to go back, let's just say I'm going to go back several years. Now, if I apply this filter, it's going to provide me all my recommendations going back to 2016. The reason I'm doing this is within this group section here, or column rather, you can see all of my active ingredient group numbers, and we can look to see across corn, across soybeans, etc. We use a lot of group 2s, a lot of group 11s. So you can be thinking about resistance issues, etc. from this view. Now, the other thing that I want to point out is if I do multi-select here or even do a select all, I can export this to either PDF or Excel. But just to showcase what that Excel output looks like, this will provide you with a row per field, and then you can manipulate the columns to get to some sort of spray record that you might need for compliance. So you can see in this case, each row represents a field and a product. So if I just highlight this series here, you can see that this was one is completed, who actually sprayed it, who is the applicator. We do include your temp, wind speed, wind direction at time of application. And now if I come over to products, you can see this was an affinity, an Acheron, etc. was included in that recommendation with the rates, etc. So again, this is where you could, for compliance purposes, you could perhaps manipulate this, and then you'd have a report that you'd need for compliance purposes. Going back into controller, one of the last things that I wanted to showcase today would be the ability to view a rolled up view of what's been applied across a year. So far, this has given us a view of kind of all the recs across fields. One of the things that we can do is within our field journal reports, we can select a field. So let me go back to all our fields and go to field 231. If I click on this field, and I view all my events. You can see that these events represent things like your scouting reports, your recommendations, your planting dates, etc. But I could break this down by recommendations, and now this is going to be a ledger view of date by date what I sprayed on this field 231. And I could export this as a PDF as a spray record for this report that could, again, be used for compliance. The other thing as far as a rollup goes, if I click on scouting and I look at this usage tab, so within here, there's an advice option, which I can click on. Now this tells me within the last 30 days, and I'll actually expand this out. We'll say the last 12 months. You're going to see all the recommendations that I've written. So I've written 211 recommendations. I've completed 31 of them. You can see which dates those fell on when we wrote the most recommendations, etc. But scrolling down here, we get to some interesting information as far as how many products I included, the number of products per recommendation, what those products were. On the right-hand side, you see how many times I applied those, or recommended them rather. Top fields, the mixes that I use most commonly, who the author of those recommendations are. So this is kind of a nice roll-up of this data, which you can get at any point in time by clicking on the usage tab. But you can also filter this down by grower or sub-entity in your operation to know what chemicals are being recommended and applied. So that is an overview of the recommendation feature. If you've got questions, we'd love to field those now in the text of Microsoft Teams in this conference. Otherwise, if you have any questions, you can email them to info@farmqa.com and we'll address those directly. In addition, you can start a demo of our product and trial this yourself. And that way you can put in your specific products and see how this could be used for your operation. So with that, I will be looking for questions. Otherwise, thank you for tuning in and please join in future weeks.